This is Purple Radio.
Hello and welcome to Purple Radio's election interviews. My name is Max Kendix and today I'm talking to Jack Ballingham, who is standing for Opportunities Officer. Hi Jack, thanks for coming on.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So just to start off, tell us a little bit about yourself. So, how might people already know you around Durham?
So I'm currently a third year. I study IR. I'm from Aiden's. People might have come across me. I'm currently the co-chair of the Labour Club, and I've been on the exec of that for the last couple of years. So that's really the main sort of place people might know me from. And I've been involved in things like supporting UCU strikes and other things like that.
And how do you feel that experience sort of feeds into this role? How do you feel that is relevant?
I think being involved on student group execs for the last couple of years has given me a pretty good insight into the way the SU deals with societies, and obviously Opportunities Officer deals with that kind of thing. So I think it gives me a good sort of experience of what things need to change.
Do you just want to run through some of your sort of key policies? What's on your manifesto?
Yeah, so I've broken it up into sort of three main areas, which are democracy, transparency, and efficiency. Obviously, the democracy review has been a big thing in the last few months. I think it's been a pretty good initiative. I think it's sort of unearthed a lot of the problems people have with SU democracy. And something that I'd, obviously I don't want to prejudge what the implementation part of the review will look like, but something I'd like to work on is reforming assembly, because that's supposed to be, students' main way to influence decision-making at the SU. Over a quarter of the roles on assembly are not elected directly by students. There's no public record of who's on it, so I think a bit of reform is in order there. In terms of transparency, the Governance and Grants Committee, which is sort of a subcommittee of the SU, they handle student group funding, they handle motions from assembly, and there are no minutes published from Governance and Grants, and there are no guidelines published for why they would strike down motions. So I think that needs to be made a bit more open. I'd also like to publish the minutes of all the meetings that I'd attend as Opportunities Officer. I'd attach that to my officer's report to Assembly, probably. And also the publication of more financial info from the Board of Trustees. Because you get your yearly sort of trustees report, but I think there should be a bit more detail on how funding's been allocated for societies and things. And also I think student media is a pretty important way to make the SU transparent. So I'd like to try to restore the funding for Platinate too. In terms of efficiency, because I've been involved on society execs over the last couple of years, I've noticed that the way that societies handled by the SU can sometimes be, or it can feel a little arbitrary. There isn't necessarily much clarity on how, what societies are supposed to do. I think a lot of this comes from this thing called the Student Group Agreement. I think, I don't think a lot of people have heard of it, but it's essentially the governing document for societies. And it creates this list of duties and things for societies to do. But I don't think it gives enough autonomy to societies. I think it makes running societies awkward. It can feel sometimes that there's not much guidance, but the SU expects you to do a lot of things. So I'd like to, scrap that and have a student consultation to draw up a new replacement document to, run societies. And that would be ideally approved by a referendum at the end of the consultation process. So yeah, those are my three main areas.
Yeah, very interesting, and I'll touch on lots of those. Let's start off with societies and efficiency. Yep. Really recently, there was a new policy which has to be passed by the SU. Legally they have to pass it on freedom of speech. There are lots of things added there about vetting external speakers that come in, and ignoring the sort of abstract arguments that go on about freedom of speech, specifically in terms of student groups and the bureaucracy that creates for them. Do you think that that's an appropriate policy for the SU to have? And do you think you'd be able to change it in the future?
Yeah, so I think it's really important that the SU helps societies, make their spaces safe for everybody. I don't think, I think there should be definitely some control of, inviting sort of extremist and, racist, homophobic, or transphobic, any other kind of hatred that shouldn't be tolerated. I think a lot of the problems people have with this policy is the control that it would give to the SU. I think to sort of clarify that, there needs to be a lot of clarity on, which kinds of speakers the SU would be, preventing from coming. And it needs to be, there needs to be as little bureaucracy as possible involved. It's going to have to be, a clear, easy to use process so that societies know what they need to be doing. But no, I'm not opposed in principle to, stopping racists or anything like that.
Sure. And yeah. You mentioned the democracy review as well. So on that point, there were some criticisms throughout the year from students about the way that it was conducted and what it applies to. So, the use of sort of £9,000 on a consultancy firm and to conduct the review, the fact that it wasn't implemented in time, perhaps for this election cycle, which we'll get onto as well, and maybe the sort of issues it covers as well. Do you agree with any of those criticisms? And as Opportunities Officer next year, coming off the back end of that, will you be sort of fully implementing everything the Democracy Review recommends as well?
Yeah, so obviously, as you said, it was outsourced to a private company at the cost of several £1,000s. I'm not sure how necessary that was. I think it might have been possible to do it in-house for, not several £1,000s. In terms of timescale, I'm not sure. I'm not sure of the process that went on behind the scenes. I don't know if it would have been possible to bring it into effect before this election, but it would have been nice to have perhaps a bit more clarity on election rules, because obviously the election rules have been revised and there's a clear set of guidelines, but that wasn't done, as far as I'm aware, in consultation with Assembly or anything like that. So yeah, that would have been good. So yeah.
And in terms of implementing it going forward, would you be happy to take that on as well? Yeah,
definitely. Obviously, I believe in the implementation is happening for the rest of this term and next term, but I think it was valuable. I think that it did a fairly good job of articulating some of the concerns that people had. So yeah, I'm not opposed to implementing and changing the SU to, get its recommendations into effect.
According to a student survey last year, out of the 157 students' unions in the country, Durham SU is the least popular in the country. Now, obviously, you'd hope that your policies, of democracy, transparency, and efficiency will try and alleviate that somewhat. But just to sort of step back a bit, what do you think is the root cause of that sort of level of popularity in Durham?
I think it's a lack of trust. I think that comes from the fact that people don't know what the SU is doing. People are not clear on how they can influence things. They're not clear on what the SU does day to day. And obviously that's to do with a lack of transparency. Things like Assembly, people don't know how to get involved. They don't know who their representative is. I think also people have in the past had the impression that the SU isn't really particularly bothered about what its members say. So long as people don't know how to get involved, and the SU perhaps needn't listen to anybody. I remember at the time of that survey, the response from the SU was something along the lines of, well, we've done all of these great things, so perhaps we need to do a better job of showing students how much work we do for them, which might be true, but it kind of missed the point that people felt not represented by the SU.
And moving on then to elections, and obviously that's one of the big sticking points in terms of trust. And last year, just to remind listeners, 58% of people voted for reopen nominations across all categories. Those votes were then deleted following a campaign, what was called a campaign violation by the Ron campaign team, and the current officer slate was put in place. If the same or similar thing happened this year, what would you do about it?
Well, I don't think a similar thing will happen this year because the SU has put forward, you might not agree with the guidelines, but clearer guidelines than existed last year. So I don't expect that a situation will arise where that's going to happen again. In terms of the election rules that the SU have put forward now, obviously I've said it wasn't drawn up, as far as I know, in consultation with Assembly or anybody. I think it's good that they've got a bit more clarity on what to do, but I think it would be good to have, as part of implementing the democracy review, some deeper consultation on how to change election rules.
So the rules this year, you feel they're clear, but are they fair?
I think, particularly around Ron, I think the way of treating it as an actual candidate is perhaps not the best way to do it. No. I think.
Yeah, go on. Sorry.
No, I think. I think treating it as a candidate will just lead to even more confusion if there are other breaches rules by people.
Sure. And looking back at last year's elections, then, do you think those were fair? Do you think that process was a fair one?
No, I don't agree that it was particularly fair. I don't think you can delete 58% of ballots and claim that it was a fair process. I mean, whether there were campaign breaches is neither here nor there, really, because you can't really read intention into 58% of ballots being cast. And it was 58% of ballots that included Ron anywhere in the preferences, as far as I remember, were removed. No, I don't think that was fair.
So touching on something that you talked about at the start, there have been lots of questions over the past year about funding of student groups, and lots of people look at the SU and they see, a lot of staff. They see a budget of around £900,000, and it seems that this year especially, across the board, there's been almost no funding for student groups, and it seems it can't support its most crucial activity. It's the most sort of activity that everyone sees on a day-to-day basis. So how would you go about sort of responding to the people who have those concerns and changing that going forward?
Yeah, obviously the SU, obviously they have quite a bit of money because they managed to spend quite a lot of money on other things, obviously, but at the same time they've cut funding for Palatinate. Student group funding hasn't been particularly great. I think the problem with student group funding comes from a lack of clarity, a lack of transparency, similar to a lot of the other problems, because I feel like the process for going about getting funding for student groups can be complicated, and obviously a lot of the time it doesn't make very much sense. People can get funding rejected and not know why. So yeah, there needs to be a lot more clarity around that, and I don't think that cutting money for high-profile things like Palatinate is a very good way to go about running the SU.
Yeah, and you mentioned Palatinate a few times, so just sort of specifically on that, I guess two separate questions. Do you think it was the right decision to cut the budget in September, and when you would come in September again, do you think can you commit to that sort of being reinstated?
No, I don't think it was the right decision. Obviously, it was justified initially, they said, because of cost cutting due to the coronavirus, but then they extended the time scale so that Palatinate wouldn't have any funding for, I think, 3 years. Whether I can commit to restoring funding, I do want to bring back the funding, but obviously, as far as I know, the Opportunities Officer can't just allocate money. It's something that I'll definitely be pushing for. I'll make it a goal, but I don't know how much power I'd have to immediately reinstate it.
Sure, and I think that's it. Thanks very much, Jack, for coming on today. What's sort of your final message? Why should people vote for you?
My final message would be, I know why people don't like the SU. I know why people have been dissatisfied, and I have too. I think I understand those problems. I think I have some decent solutions to them.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
For more of Purple Radio's interviews with candidates in the run-up to the SU election, click on the playlist now.